All right. So, welcome everyone. Sorry for the background noise as people are still trickling in. Welcome to our TAP-SF hosted professional development virtual fireside chat with Elmntri and Jeff Stu. I'm Jeff Kuo. I'm serving as the external VP on the TAP-SF board. A quick intro for those of you who are new. So TAP-SF stands for Taiwanese American Professionals. We are the San Francisco chapter. We're a part of TACL, which is the Taiwanese American Citizens League, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So we are a 100% volunteer-run organization with a focus on fostering Taiwanese American community, especially in the Bay Area. But we welcome people of all backgrounds and cultures. Our main goals and objectives include promoting Taiwanese American identity. Some of the things that we do to help foster that is, if you were in the Bay Area or you read the news, we hosted a huge Taiwanese American Culture Festival in Union Square in San Francisco back in May. Hugely successful. We do things such as supporting the campaign to write in Taiwanese American for the US Census to promote our representation. We inspire the next generation of Taiwanese Americans by collaborating with organizations such as LIFE, which is Leading Youth Forward, is a sister org that puts on summer camps for Taiwanese American youth. We award scholarships to highlight outstanding students in the Bay Area, and we build the community by hosting events based upon our pillars, which include community service, health and wellness, social, and of course, professional development events such as this one that you are joining us at. The TAP network itself spans across multiple major cities in the US, including San Francisco, Los Angeles, Orange County, Seattle, Austin, Atlanta, Boston, Detroit, Washington, D.C., and New York. I might or might not be missing one or two. But if you're ever in any of those metropolitan areas, feel free to reach out to any of those orgs. We're always throwing all sorts of different types of events. If you're interested in joining our board and helping us facilitate these types of events, keep an eye out for an email that we'll send out at the end. And yeah, so that's my spiel about TAP. We will be recording this event, making it available for reference, and you can always reach out to myself or any of the team on here or Elmntri for that. For today's format, we're going to encourage the audience to engage with our speaker utilizing the hand raise function and just jump in there for any sort of live questions. If you're able to, feel free to turn on your camera so we can see you and have a real conversation, as real as these virtual conversations can be. And also the chat function is going to be moderated by our TAP-SF PD team, which will filter into a Q&A functionality, which will save some time at the end, Jeff, to answer for those of you who are maybe a little bit more shy. So that's it for me. I will throw it over to Vicky from from Elmntri, and we'll go from there. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff, and TAP-SF for the opportunity for hosting this fireside chat together. I'm Vicky, currently driving talent people operation at Elmntri, and Jeff is our founder, the other Jeff. That Jeff has the same background as me, Elmntri background. And so Elmntri, we are a new startup studio specializing in root cause health, and we build consumer health startups from Taiwan for the US market. And yeah, if you would like to learn more about Elmntri, what we do after this event, including like how we leverage Taiwan's resources in building global startups, or how we build AI data flywheels with a focus on Taiwan's expertise, which Jeff will cover in some of the details later, or just our approach to root cause health. If you are interested in any of those things I said, I think it makes sense for you to sign up for our newsletter on our website, or following Elmntri on LinkedIn. Both will be a good way to stay connected, stay updated with us, and receive more detailed information. Yeah. And now we are currently looking for people who are also passionate about functional health and interested in addressing health from a root cause approach, and people who are ready to be a founder to join our Entrepreneurs in Residence program. Yeah, so if you are like interested in those, here's a QR code that directly like go to our website and can have check out more information out there. Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, sorry. I forgot to ask, but addressing the entire audience, and I don't know if Ada or Stacy, if you've done this already, but if we can put into the chat, I want to open, before I throw it back over to you, Jeff, Sue, if we can ask the audience 2 separate questions, and if you can throw it into the chat as far as what you currently do, where you're logging in from, your background, for example, are you a founder? Are you someone who's considering founding a company? Are you working at a startup? Basically, give us a little bit about yourself so we can better identify some of the audience and maybe where we want to drive this conversation. And then the second part of it is, what is one thing that you are essentially hoping to get out of the conversation with the time that we have with Jeff Sue today? Thanks. All right. And over to you, Jeff.
Okay, so not gonna do a long intro of myself. I think Vicky already made me sound good in the, I guess, the event introduction. I'm just gonna say that this is my 3rd startup, and it's the most meaningful one for me. It's the one that is at an intersection of a couple of things I care a lot about. One is the ability to grow startups from Taiwan. And the other is to address health as, I guess, not the absence of disease and symptoms, but a state of well-being. And that really means addressing it from a whole body perspective, looking at the biochemical roots of how that works. I'm not going to talk too much about health today. You know, we can cover that another time if people are interested, but talk mostly about growing startups. But you know, from our standpoint, we're not looking for EIRs that come from a health background. We're looking for EIRs that understand consumers and can connect the dots, because our approach to health is really just about looking at things as a system, and it means crossing multiple specialties. So we've built a team in-house to support our EIRs, and from a health standpoint, we just want them to have an ability to go to market. All right, so I guess I'm going to start by asking people, I don't know how interactive we can be, but I'm going to ask a trite question. What's a startup?
A lemonade stand.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to say a lemonade stand.
Lemonade stand, okay. Anyone else? All right, so I guess my view of a startup is this. There are different definitions. Oh, okay, Jenny raised the hand.
It's a small company in search of a business model that they can validate so that they can raise funds and grow it and scale it so that there's adoption of the innovation.
Okay, that was the expert answer. All right, nice. Kevin? Oh, Kevin's clapping. All right, the reason I asked that question is, you know, there are a lot of companies that are started. I don't consider all of them to be startups. And in fact, I guess my view of startups is very similar to, there was an article written by Paul Graham, probably about 15 years ago, and it's called Startups Equal Growth. All right, so everything that comes from how we view startups comes from startup growth. Right. So, you know, I think if you were to set up a lemonade stand or a bubble tea shop or something, these are businesses, and they're great businesses to start if that's what you're looking to do. But in terms of startups and ecosystems, we're really looking for growth. Right. So everything that comes from being a startup, in my opinion, comes from growth. Right. And that's the issue that we're trying to address in Taiwan right now, because I think Taiwan's ecosystem is still in activation mode. meaning there are a lot of accelerators. There's a lot of activity, a lot of startups being created, but they don't grow and they don't die and they don't have lateral movement, so they don't learn, right? So an ecosystem needs to be one that continues to learn and evolve and become sustainable, right? And it's if you look at how ecosystems started, it's the companies like Fairchild Semiconductor, PayPal, Alibaba, companies like that after they exited, virtuous cycles were created. People came out, started other companies, invested in other companies, and that's how ecosystems grew, right? So Taiwan right now is at a point where there are thousands of startups. There's a lot of government money flowing into these startups, but most of these startups right now are kind of stuck, in this limbo. Don't want to call them zombies. They're doing good things, but they're not on a trajectory where they can reach a point where they could return money to their investors, and those investors can return money to their LPs, so the cycle can start again. All right, so that is part of what we're trying to address with Elmntri in a microcosm, and we're not the only ones doing it. There's a bunch of people back from Silicon Valley who have been successful, founding companies like YouTube and Guitar Hero, Thundercore, Mochi Media, and we're all trying to solve this similar problem, right? But what I didn't want to do on this call is just kind of drone on and on. So if anyone has a question, please interrupt. And I'll probably ask you some more questions as well. All right, so my next question is going to be, what goes into startup growth?
Revenue.
Sorry, go ahead.
Revenue. Is that you, Jeff? No? Okay.
It's me, Chi.
Okay. Introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Chi. I am a product marketer at a data privacy startup based in Palo Alto. This is my first TAP event, so nice to meet everybody.
Awesome. Yeah, obviously, without revenue, there's no growth. But does revenue imply growth?
Only if it's positive.
Only if it's positive. Yeah, I mean, for example, we talked about the lemonade stand, and we talked about the bubble tea shop, and we talked about a lot of the companies that are created. They do generate revenue, but it's revenue that does not drive growth necessarily. All right, so when we talk about startups, actually, I'll just boil it down to what I think goes into startup growth, and it's two parts. One is called benefit, and one is called barrier. So actually, those of you that use the strategic framework that a lot of startups use, which is called 7 powers, will recognize the terminology, but it's not about those terms. Benefit is really just about finding a fit with what the customer needs, and hopefully as quickly as possible, and hopefully with enough margin so that you can turn around and invest into creating a moat, right? So those of you who follow Warren Buffett understand what a moat is, right? If you don't have a moat, even if you are generating revenue, and even if you have customers who want your products, competitors are going to enter, and then it's going to be a race to the bottom on pricing, right? And then you don't have enterprise value, because once you race to the bottom, your margins shrink, and then you can't invest in the next step, right? So that is something that Taiwan startups face, and it's also something that we've kind of learned from the ecosystem overall, because if you look at a lot of the ODMs in Taiwan, like Foxconn, Quanta, so on, their gross margins have shrunk over time, and we're looking at 6% to 8% for many of them. And that is just not a situation where you can then turn around and invest in creating future enterprise value. All right, so what do I mean by that? Can anyone tell me what it means when I talk about barrier? And what are some of the ways in which we create barrier? All right. So barrier, like I said, is also called a moat. It's also called defensibility, right? And there are multiple ways to do so. So I'm actually going to go through a couple case studies. For example, there is one company in Taiwan that has been able to create a real moat. It's one of the most important companies in the world. Anyone know who I'm talking about? That's right, TSMC.
Yeah, I got a couple of IP, TSMC, intellectual property protection in the chat. I don't know if you can see that, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm seeing it. Yeah, I appreciate it. Anyone who's throwing stuff out, I appreciate it. So I don't have to just kind of, lecture the group. I'll address it in a couple different ways. So anyone know what TSMC's gross margin looks like? %60. So in a country where everyone else is under 10, and there are many companies that are under 1% net profit margin, TSMC is generating 60%. And that is because they have been able to create a flywheel. Their margin keeps going up, right? Originally, they started off by addressing a problem that nobody else was addressing at the time. So that's a moat called counter positioning, right? When Morris Chang was working at TI and other places, he heard a lot of engineers saying, hey, I want to start my own company, but I don't have the money. Why? Because I have to have my own foundry to start my own company, right? So he created a situation where engineers could go out and start their own companies without creating a foundry. So this is how companies like Qualcomm and Broadcom and even NVIDIA were born. And what he did was he solved the problem for those companies. He's able to create chips. All they had to do is design. And he took the revenues from that, he invested it back into research and development, like Jenny is saying. And TSMC started off by licensing Philips technology that it was about 10 years behind the cutting edge. And now they're about 10 years ahead of a lot of other companies. Well, they're 10 years ahead probably of China, couple years ahead of Samsung and others. Why? Because they've created this flywheel where their investment into R&D allowed their customers to build better applications, and the revenues flowed back into TSMC, and then they would invest it again. All right, so the last 3 years they talked about investing $100 billion. All right, so they have one of the biggest technology moats that the world has ever seen. But these days, moats are not really created by technology anymore. So IP is, for example, software, technology IP. The world has gotten very efficient at creating technology. All right, so even right now with GPT, all these large language models, which we don't know why at certain number of training parameters, the model takes a step up in capability, but we do know that more training parameters is better, right? But we're also already talking about these large language models not necessarily having a moat. So there's an internal memo that leaked from Google, some of you may be aware of it, that talked about, both Bard and OpenAI not having much of a moat against these open source models in the long term that you can fine tune their training. You can stack the fine tuning on top, right? So that's arguable at this point, but moats based upon technology are something that mostly happened 30 or 40 years ago. In the internet era, 1995 and on, most moats were created by something called a network effect in technology. Anyone understand what a network effect is? All right, so a network effect is you have one phone, right? And it's not very useful because you got nobody to call. So the more people who have phones, the more valuable the network overall becomes. And that applies to, a lot of internet business models. Facebook, one person on Facebook, not useful. 5 billion, more useful. And it's probably not 5 billion anymore, but that's where Facebook got to where it was, through network effects. That's how marketplace models like Uber and Airbnb got to where they were, through network effects. So I'm going to talk through another case study. First of all, this direction I'm going in, is it interesting to people? Okay. Thumbs up. I will get to the point on Taiwan in a little bit. So most of you know Netflix, right? And why do you think Netflix was successful? Did they just catch a wave? Were they in the right place at the right time? Did they have better content than everyone else? Yeah, I'd love to hear from Stacy.
I think it's because at the time, we had to go to like Blockbuster, like an actual store to like rent movies, and then Netflix was like the first one that like shipped DVDs to your house.
Mhm.
And then like so it's kind of similar to what you were saying about TSMC addressing a problem that no one else addressed at the time.
Exactly. So when I talk about growth, I talk about benefit and I talk about barrier. So that's a huge benefit, convenience, right? You don't have to go to the store. You don't have to worry about late fees. But what stopped Blockbuster from, investing their immense resources into killing Netflix by doing the same thing? All right, so I'll answer my own question. Is that this is where a moat comes into play, and this one is again the same one that TSMC used in a lot of ways. It's something called a counter position. It's a situation where Blockbuster's revenues mostly came from late fees. Right, so if they went to a model in which they were, hey, keep 4 DVDs out at one time, don't worry about the late fees. When you ship one back, you get another one. Their late fees go away. So they were not willing to cannibalize themselves to compete with Netflix. And by the time they realized that Netflix was about to kill them, it was too late. So Netflix basically took out Blockbuster with a counterposition mode. All right, but then after they took out Blockbuster, they decided, hey, let's invest into streaming. That's something that is even more convenient than getting DVDs in the mail. And let's stream content, let's go license it. And then, other players came and they're all licensing the same content. So what did Netflix do next? And why did that allow them to continue to grow? They started creating their own content, right? They created exclusive content to Netflix. So I'm going to ask, why is that a moat?
It's a limited resources only they have access to.
Limited resources in what way?
It's only available on their platform. And
it's only available on their platform. But HBO has Game of Thrones, and that would only be available on HBO. So what keeps people from also signing up for HBO and so on? Nothing. But what gives Netflix an advantage over some of these other streaming platforms who could also create exclusive content and also have the chops to create, well-received, well-reviewed exclusive content? So this is where Netflix's head start comes into play, right? We talk about first mover advantages. It's a lot more complicated than just being a first mover. But Netflix had more subscribers in the beginning because they moved into streaming before everybody else. And the way that you take advantage of that is that you make fixed cost investments into infrastructure, into exclusive content, right? So why is that an advantage for Netflix? Because if Netflix has 100 million subscribers and it costs them 100 million to make exclusive content, then it costs them $1 per subscriber, right? Somebody else has 50 million, then it costs them $2 per subscriber. And that is a moat called economies of scale, right? So a lot of people look at Netflix as just being in the right place at the right time, but a lot of it was intentional and it was purposely designed that way. And that's how they accomplished the position that, they were in, previous to recent quarters. But that's how they got their position in the market, right? So that is what we are trying to help startups in Taiwan do. Our approach to health is a counter position. We are trying to make the fixed cost investments so that startups that build with us can go to market and grow. right, can get to benefit as quickly as possible because we know how to engage with our core target audience. We know how to, we've built the repeatable infrastructure so that we can engage with them. And then we have built multiple different types of moats on the back end so companies can scale their approach and defend against competitors once they make an impact. Go ahead, Jeff.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. There was, I think this is a good segue. We have a question in the Q&A, and I'll just read it direct verbatim. It says, Jeff, what's your journey into founding Elmntri, and what was your thought process for wanting to focus on growing startups specifically from Taiwan?
Great question. It's the intersection of a lot of things, right? So we did a startup because we're thinking about intersections, but my own lived experience is a bunch of intersections as well. All right, so like I mentioned before, like Vicky's written about, this is my third company. I've done companies in the US, in China, consumer, enterprise. All of them have been able to get to some decent scale. And all of them were then, after the scale, the first one got caught up in the dot-com bust, and the second one got caught up in the global financial crisis. But they still had decent results, but not what they could have been. All right. But all of that was kind of training on what I'm talking about now is how do you build something that's beneficial to a customer? And then how do you create defensibility around that so that you can continue to grow? Right. So that's the learning from those things. But I guess more importantly is I'm Taiwanese American. I was born and raised in the US. I care about the future of Taiwan, right? I think like a lot of us do. And when I was in China, I was always trying to figure out what I could do, come back to help. And it's been hard. It's been, a decade worth of mentoring, exploring, learning, working on different projects, trying to see where we can make an impact because there is a political situation surrounding Taiwan, but there's also an economic identity situation surrounding Taiwan. And we need to move up the value chain and create our own identity. And to be able to do so, we need to be able to innovate at the grassroots level, right? And not have these kind of larger enterprises who themselves started out as small, medium enterprises kind of dominate the conversation and keep the small companies from growing. So that's a piece of it. But the third leg of it, I guess, is my own lived experience is a lot of the reason, if you look at my resume, there's a big gap, right? I haven't done, this is the first thing I've officially had on my resume other than the exploration for the last 10 years. And a lot of that is just because I have been going through a lot of lived experience on the health side. Right. So my younger sister had cancer, my mom at the same time, my dad has heart issues, both my grandparents died of strokes. All this is happening at the same time. I keep losing relatives, another one this year, another one last year to cancer. And I myself had some issues that I'm still trying to solve. But, about 5 years ago, I was completely debilitated and I was not really able to function. And there's a lot of names attached to what I had, but it's not a simple one like cancer. So the intersection of these three things is what brought me to creating a studio, because I really think that, so this is where I'll kind of segue into the Taiwan piece, is that Taiwan is not set. It's not positioned to be chasing the shiny coin, right? It was not necessarily competitive in the accelerator era, the internet accelerator era. Why? Because we don't have that fast cadence, that rapid experimentation, iteration. We don't have that intuition for customers. We don't have that natural athleticism. But what we do have in Taiwan is this deep skill set, right, of building. We went from exporting textiles to slowly building up one of the world's the world's electronics industry. Everything runs through Taiwan, right? When you talk about U.S. startups that were in hardware, which is a little bit out of vogue now. 5 years ago, we're talking about going to China instead of Taiwan because China's the route has been paved a little bit more smoothly. But Taiwan didn't really jump into the conversation and say, hey, it's apples to oranges, right? Factories are not original design manufacturing. They're not supply chain. Factories are final assembly. That's 2% of the value chain. That's what China does. What Taiwan does is it pulls the string to the entire supply chain, right? What it does is design for manufacturing, strategic sourcing, end-of-life planning, all these things. And they could solve a startup's problem very easily, but they don't necessarily want to because the startup does not from day one bring the volume that they're looking for. So closing that gap is something that if Taiwan wanted to connect to other ecosystems, solving that problem is one that it could address. Right. I lost my train of thought a little bit. We segued into this. What did I want to talk about Taiwan? Went off on the tangent.
Maybe
Yes, I'm gonna leave it to you to save me. What's the next question?
Yeah, no. I know we were chatting a little earlier around some of our own personal experiences with Asia and Taiwan, and I had mentioned sort of, especially in some of the industries that I was in when I was doing business over there, that going into Taiwan at times it was a little bit hard for me to personally identify or even link the word startup or founding with Taiwan space, especially coming from the Bay Area where it's so prevalent in Silicon Valley that you turn the corner at a Starbucks and you meet a founder and everyone's a CEO or a startup guy or girl, right? So I would love for you to maybe chat around some of the value prop of startups in Taiwan, some of the sort of maybe identify some opportunities that some of us in the chat and in this group would not have traditionally been able to understand or even see, and maybe open our eyes a little bit to that.
Yep. That was actually my train of thought. I really appreciate it. That's where I was going. So thank you for that. Like you said, people don't usually think about Taiwan with startups, and that goes back to what I started this off with. It's in Taiwan, startups don't equal growth, right? And without growth, you don't get all the things that come from growth, right? Which is why is Silicon Valley the way it is? Why is the Bay Area the way it is? Because you create startups that grow and exit, and people go off and create other startups, and it keeps perpetuating. All right, that perpetuation has not happened in Taiwan. It's very linear. There's a lot of activity, and like I said, it's a bunch of 5-person startups that stay that way for years. Right. So that's one of the things that we're trying to address, right, is you have to have something sustainable. You have to have growth so that there are exits, so that money is returned, and so on. All right. But why are things changing? Why are we having this call, right? What are the people that I talked about earlier? What are we working on to make things different? Why can we build from Taiwan now when it would have been kind of inconceivable several years back? I think it's several things, right? I think we're moving. When I started my first company, it was 99. Cost us $16 million to get to an MVP. I think most people know what minimum viable product means, right? Cost us $16 million. The cost of doing that during the accelerator era dropped at least 1,000 times, right? So then it became about speed to product market fit. It became unbundling pieces of enterprises, working on that, and having quick exits because of, you could build a feature and get acquired by a product, but it was about speed and not necessarily domain expertise, right? We're kind of entering this new mode. I think they call it, I won't throw out fancy terms, but we're entering this new phase where there are a whole bunch of immature technologies kind of coming onto the scene. And the ability to understand customers and iterate quickly to that has become table stakes in the game, but now you need to be able to stack capabilities together so that you can go to market, generate the data, create flywheels around data, and so on, right? And these types of things, stacking these deep skill sets, has always been Taiwan's strength, right? So our studio is not designed as a catch the wave model, right? We're not trying to go for an exit next year. We're trying to solve hard problems, and the problems that we can solve 5 years from now are definitely different and harder than the ones that we can solve today. We're only a year old, right? But as we keep spinning this flywheel in Taiwan from a technology standpoint, we keep compounding value on that end. So I'll get a little bit more concrete. That's very abstract, I know. For example, anyone in the startup today, are you trying to hire AI engineers? How easy is that to do? Probably not too easy, right? In Taiwan, we've been able to scale up our team pretty quickly. We've been able to scale up our team with strong talent, right? Taiwan is producing tens of thousands of engineers annually out of schools. They're trying to catch this wave, and a lot of these engineers don't have places to work, right? And there's more nuance to it. A lot of them are not ready to work either, and that gap is one that needs to be closed. But Taiwan is one of the few places in which there may be an oversupply in the medium term of engineers, and that's a resource that we're all going to need, right? Now, I don't want Taiwan to be the back end to the world forever, right? But if you can create a situation in which you can scale up your engineering team, you're not just throwing stuff over the wall to them like they would in another company, but you're getting them involved in product development. You're hoping that over the long term, these engineers can go out and start their own companies as well, right? So that is the goal of creating an ecosystem in a microcosm in Taiwan. Right, so AI is a big piece. If anyone wants to talk about that a little bit more, my thoughts on it, we can definitely do that. But there's a lot of other things as well. Go ahead, Jeff.
I think we have a couple of questions from the audience that I think there's two, one from Philip, one from Alicia. They're kind of tied together. From Philip, the first one is, would like to know people in our ecosystem and how a company balances the more conservative Asian business culture side of things being in Taiwan versus the United States.
If I'm understanding it correctly, that's a great question. We have an advantage. We're not trying to solve that all at once, right? We can't, right? So we're just like how we address our customers in general. Anytime we start a new company, we're just trying to find a wedge into addressing these issues, right? So right now we're going to market only in the US, right? We're building in Taiwan, going to market in the US. We're bringing on people who, in terms of the intuition for that, are probably, we try to hire the people who have that natural intuition for that in Taiwan. And they come from various backgrounds, but we target a very specific slice. And then, when they're in the studio, we try to close the gap. And then, mindset shift as we move to kind of this more aggressive, rapid experimentation, get in front of the customer as quickly as possible. And we keep emphasizing certain mindsets and behaviors. And then, when these people go off and start their own companies, we hope that it sticks, right? Frankly, in terms of the conservative business culture, we've tried to avoid a lot of it for now, right? We don't spend a lot of time engaging with the government, even though the government does have money. We don't necessarily agree with how it's allocated in the short term. And we don't want to jump through all the hoops. We've been through all this in the past, so it's learning, right? So, it's something that, I guess I'll put it this way. I'm not trying to make it seem like we're circumventing all of Taiwan. That's not the case at all. All right. We would not have been able to build this in the US, right? Because those of you that are familiar with the studio model, especially one that's called an asset heavy, meaning we build a lot of infrastructure in-house and we're not just taking in external deal flow. It's got a lot of moving parts, and those moving parts are expensive, right? So part of what we can leverage in Taiwan and in the short term, and part of it is because of the conservative culture, is a longer runway to solve hard problems. All right, so I don't want this to be what Taiwan's about in the long term, but it's definitely something that we benefit from now. If we had put the foundation of this studio in place in the US, we'd be raising money again right now. So we have all the skill sets that we need in terms of the tech, the product, market facing, the science, and obviously we're using a lot of AI for our internal processes, but it's something that we could have only done in Taiwan. So we benefit from that as well, right? But we definitely don't do things like a lot of the other companies around us do. We don't go to these events that are dog and pony shows where our customers aren't present. It's a kind of learning that I've had from previous startups. That's not limited to Taiwan. Everyone does it, right? But especially with Taiwan's exhibition culture, we're not, we pick and choose who we work with in terms of partners, right? And we got to be aligned on outcomes and approach and so on, right? So, for example, on an AI side, we are partnering with some labs. These are labs that, do some exploration for us, but also they're turning out students that, want to find jobs in the longer term. And so they have a mindset, and this is not all labs in Taiwan, but this specific one has a mindset of wanting to grow AI and its ability to take companies to market in the future as well. Right. So I guess it's, we're not trying to solve the whole problem at once is the short answer. And because we're one of the few entities in Taiwan that have this message, we can pick and choose who we're able to work with. And I think over time, if this sticks, just like, when I was in China in 2007, China was a mess, but it iterated its approaches by bringing in people like myself with a different mindset. And, China is now a highly competitive startup ecosystem, right? So it is a process and it will grow over time if we have some success and the others like us have some success. Does that answer the question? A lot of words for...
Jeff, I'm going to actually dig into Alicia's question, which is a little bit more. I'll add into that as well, so we can kind of delve into it. Alicia's question was, I'd like to learn more about the differences between Taiwan versus U.S. startup ecosystem. For example, available resources, mentality, and culture. I know you touched on that already with that last question, but I'm going to push a little bit more and say, for those of us who are on the call, maybe who are interested in or involved in a startup, if you can touch on that, and also maybe if there's some insight into someone who is new to the environment and say, okay, I'm part of a startup, and what Jeff and Elmntri is doing is very interesting. Maybe there's some opportunity for me and my organization in Taiwan. How would I go about getting started? Who would I reach out to? What steps would I take in order to network with the right people, get connected with the correct resources and such?
It's a great question. And there's several parts to it. How is it different? I'll boil it down. I'll say that Taiwan's really good at the back end. Taiwan's not very good at the front end. Right, so, we talk about, so if you can bring the front end to Taiwan, you have an understanding of how to go to market, how to iterate to customers, and you can leverage the back end, you'll be able to build something here. It'll take patience because building the relationships and hiring the people will take time because things work slightly different than you're used to. But without the front end that you're bringing, the average Taiwan startup here doesn't have that capability, right? So they focus on the technology layer. Obviously, I'm broad brushing, and not everyone's the same, but it's typical for a Taiwan startup to focus on the technology layer, right? Say, hey, we want to chase the shiny coin. We want to do something in Web3, or we want to do something in AI. Whatever's hot at the moment, we'll build a team around that. And then we will spend a lot of time building out a platform, over designing something before it ever touches a customer. We'll spend a year doing it, and then we'll try to go to market. And then when there's no response, we'll try to be everything to everyone. Well, we'll do some services. We'll sell this in all the geographies near us. We'll be business to consumer and business to business. We don't focus in, right? And as we know, that's a solution looking for a problem is not something that usually works. Sometimes, but not usually, right? And when you lead with technology used to be barrier, used to be defensibility. It is not anymore, right? There are a lot of entities that can build technology. All right, so if you come to Taiwan, what would I recommend? I think it depends on what you're looking to do, right? I think that, like I said, one of the reasons that Elmntri is here is we are arbitraging on the long term. We're trying to solve hard problems over time. So it's going to be a step-by-step process. So in the long term, we know that we're going to be building physical products because with health, you want sensors, you want to measure. We don't want to do that now because it's high variance and high investment, right? But over time, like I said, that is an asset that Taiwan provides that is different from anything else in the world and not very well understood, factory versus supply chain, right? Coming here and wanting to leverage developers and AI. Go ahead, Jeff.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. We have time for one last question before we wrap up, and I've got one from Jenny in the chat here, and I think it's also a good segue. Jeff, can you explain how your venture studio model works? I'm assuming, for example, some studios alleviate founders of fundraising per round or growth phase for them to focus on growing and scaling their company. So how specifically does Elmntri function and the value prop there?
Okay, great. I'll try to do this quickly. I tend to overcomplicate this. So I think not everyone is familiar with the studio model. We are not an accelerator. An accelerator tends to be a fund that invests into external companies and then provides mentorship. All right, so we're a studio, and what that means is we're an operating company structure, not a fund structure. But studios have a lot of different flavors as well. So we're at the intersection of something called a thematic focus and internal ideation. And what that allows us to do is, as opposed to taking in kind of external companies, we can design our portfolio and how it fits together. We can focus around a theme, meaning most of our companies are digital health companies, even though the founder is the one who's choosing the topic. We just stipulate that they have to address, for example, diabetes at the root. And that's why is your pancreas not creating insulin rather than providing insulin, right? And that's usually a lifestyle nutritional approach. So because there's common themes across health, we can build infrastructure that serves each of our companies, right? So, and like I said, health is a very complicated thing. I think the approach to it right now is somewhat reductionist. So our studio, being at that intersection of internal ideation and thematic focus, allows us to connect the dots in a way that compounds value over time for each of the startups that we create. So the way it works is an EIR would come and say, I'd like to start a company in the context of Elmntri. We go through an initial business modeling process. We call it our stage one. And that's looking at, is there an advantage to addressing this customer segment through Elmntri? What is the science in doing that. We have a science team behind the scenes doing so. What do you predict the unit economics are, and how is it that our infrastructure would let you scale? How do you get to benefit as quickly as possible and turn around and invest that into barriers so that you can grow that company? And then we have, like most studios, multiple stage gates to evaluate whether or not the entrepreneur is on the right track, getting the customers, scaling up, and so on. So the other end of that question was fundraising. Is we provide each of our EIRs with 150,000 US in investment. 100 of that is physical and the rest is virtual. I won't explain that right now, but I figure it out. And once you get to product market fit, what we do is we've created a network of our contacts in the investment arena, and we make those intros, but you are expected to take the company independent. All right, so we build a lot of autonomy into the process, and we pave the way. But you know, at some point, as an EIR, you're going to land on your own 2 feet, and you're going to take everything forward on your own, with our help, with our support.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jeff. I think that about covers it as far as time, unless there's any additional talking points that you wanted to go over. Jeff, in the next minute or so.
You've heard me talk. It's going to be hard for me to cover anything in a minute, which I got to get better about next time. But no, I thank you for this. I really appreciate it. You know, let's figure out how we can do something useful for people going forward. And if there are any ideas for that, feel free to shoot them out. Am I able to go in and read all the comments after the fact, or will we lose that?
Yeah, we've taken notes. I think we have a couple of questions additional, and I think what we'll go ahead and do is, for those of you who have registered, I think we should have captured your email addresses. We will send out an email with a summary and all of our contact information. I'm assuming Jeff and Vicky, you're okay with us including all of your contact info. And so that way you'll be able to reach us. The recording of this will be up shortly. We'll provide that as well. And then before I throw it over to Ada to close this out, I just want to say thank you so much from TAPSF to Jeff and Vicky and the Elmntri team for joining us today and providing subject matter expertise. It's been very informative. I've taken a ton of notes, so I'm sure I'll talk with you guys offline. But again, thank you so much.
As well.
Thank you, Jeff.
Ada, I'll throw it over to you.
Okay, so couple things before we close things out. Thanks so much everybody for joining. First thing we like to do is to capture your lovely faces, which we do at all of our virtual events. So if you are comfortable, if you don't mind turning your camera on for just 1 second, I'm going to take a quick screenshot and then I will close out with the next step. So I'll give you like 5 seconds to turn your cameras on. We would love to see your smiling faces. If you don't want to smile, I guess that's okay too.
Come on, guys.
Right.
Don't be shy.
Woohoo! Yeah, it's a judgment-free zone. All right. I'm gonna count. I'm gonna count 3. 1, 2, 3. Smile, everybody. There you go. All right. Well, thank you again to Jeff and Vicky for joining us today. Jeff and Vicky, I don't think you saw this, but in the chat box, when one of the people joining today had to leave early, he actually said what you're trying to do is really inspirational. So definitely echo that. And I can see that there's a lot of people who are interested in following up, which speaks to how valuable that conversation was today. Also want to thank all of our guests for joining for this Tap Beauty event. We recognize it's a difficult time professionally for many, including those in the startup space, and we want to be here as a Taiwanese American professionals network to support you in growing your career, your leadership skills, and your network. And one way that you can do that actually is come to one of our upcoming events and get to know and broaden your network. So in a week and a half, next Friday on the 30th, we have a Tappy Hour in SF at a place called Dragon Boat. And we also have a urban hike coming up in July. And then in August, we're going to be volunteering at a food bank, also based in San Francisco. And if you go on our Facebook page or go on our website, you'll be able to see all that information and sign up. Also wanted to let you know that if you are interested in getting more involved with TAP, we would welcome your skill set and your applications. We will open board applications up probably in August, with the next term starting in September. So you're welcome to join and contribute to our programming. And with that, I think we're just 1 minute over, so we're all good. Thank you so much.